Hi everybody, my name is Emma Lyman and today I'm going to be discussing grief experiences of children with parents who have bipolar disorder. I chose this topic because I am a child of a single mom who grew up with bipolar disorder and addiction. My understanding of grief began long before I ever experienced or learned about death. It came from watching my mom cycle through illness and wellness and absence and presence. In this presentation, I'll explore how children like me experience grief that's not about losing someone to death, but about losing parts of someone emotionally and psychologically. I'll discuss the type of griefs connected to parental mental illness, the developmental impact that it has on children and adolescents, and evidence-based ways that we can support this population as future social workers. Bipolar is a chronic mental health condition characterized by extreme mood swings. So you have your manic highs filled with a lot of energy and impulsivity to your very lows, which are depressive episodes, which can be seen as hopelessness or withdrawn from people. These shifts in emotional stability can create inconsistent parenting and emotional safety within a household. And for children living in this household, this often means constant uncertainty and fear, honestly, never knowing which version of the parent that you might get that day. Personally, for my mother's bipolar disorder, this came with incredible love, but also painful absence, especially when she turned to substances during her manic episodes or her depressive episodes. This inconsistency within my household created a form of grief that is still hard to explain. I lost the emotional connection to a parent that was still physically here, and that happens to a lot of children living with a parent with bipolar disorder. The grief experienced by children living with a parent with bipolar disorder can take on several complex forms. The first one is ambiguous loss. Within our textbook, Living Through Loss, it describes ambiguous loss as marked by uncertainty and confusion, often leaving individuals asking, is that person really there or not? This perfectly captures how it feels when you have a parent that is alive but emotionally unreachable. The second one is anticipatory grief, or grieving what is expected to come, such as fearing another relapse or hospitalization. And the third one is disenfranchised grief, meaning grief that isn't socially recognizable because your parent hasn't actually died. These forms of loss and grief are very isolating. Growing up, I grieved my mom's absence many, many times, but no one saw it as actual grief. It was considered invisible, and that invisibility made it harder to cope growing up. Research shows how widespread this issue is. In a 2024 study by Lakeborn and colleagues found that children with parents of bipolar disorder are 2 to 3 times more likely to develop psychiatric disorders, experience poor academic performance, and face higher risk of self-harm and victimization. Another study in 2025 by Tu and colleagues found that children often describe walking on eggshells, taking on adult roles, and mourning the loss of a parent that is still alive. This aligns with the concept of ambiguous loss, the emotional absence of a parent that is still alive. I can relate to this personally. My mom was really good about taking her medication for years until about the age of 12 when she stopped and everything changed. Every time that she relapsed, I felt the same wave of grief all over again, but without any real closure. According to our textbook, Living Through Loss, early adolescence is a time where children struggle between independence and the need for safety. Middle adolescence brings more emotional ambivalence, mood swings, and identity confusion. The book states ambivalence produces unpredictable emotions, reflecting the work of foregoing an identity while maturing incrementally. For children, for children of parents with bipolar disorder, these stages are even harder. They're not just figuring out who they are, they're trying to also survive the emotional chaos at home. For me, between the ages 13 and 16, I was torn between loving my mom and resenting her. I felt responsible for her stability, and when she relapsed, I felt like I failed her and myself. My grief showed up as anger and defiance when underneath I was just scared and heartbroken. In late adolescence, between the ages 18 and 22, young adults begin to form a sense of self-identity and independence. Our textbook notes that this stage often involves conflicts between closeness and distance. That resonates deeply with my experience. When I became a mom at 19, my priority shifted to creating stability for my child, something that I was never shown or that I had growing up. By then, my mom was going through one of her cycles again, and I made the painful choice to distance myself. It wasn't out of anger, it wasn't out of despite, it was just solely out of protection for my child. I had to grieve the mother I wished that she could be and accept the mother that she actually is. That kind of grief doesn't come with a funeral or closure, it comes with a lot of boundaries and survival. Grief in adolescence looks different than what we expect. Our textbook explains that adolescence grief is usually expressed through confusion, exhaustion, or anger, and they may suppress these emotions to avoid being perceived as out of control. For children of parents with bipolar disorder, that suppression is common. We learn at an early age to hide emotions because expressing them might trigger conflict or guilt. Jane Fiona, a bloggist, once reflected on her own grief, saying she blamed herself for her mother's bipolar episodes and later suicide. I connected with that. I used to think that if I was calmer, quieter, or well-behaved, maybe my mom wouldn't relapse. That kind of misplaced guilt is common for kids in unstable homes. It's grief that turns inward and shapes your self-worth. I am not alone in my experiences. Writer Erin Aaron shared her story in a 2020 blog titled Growing Up with a Bipolar Mother. She said in her blog, "I learned to love somebody who was unpredictable." That line hit very close to home for me. My mother was stable until about the age of 12, relapsed when I was 15, recovered briefly when I was 16, then relapsed again when I was 19, the same year that I became a mom. Now, at the age of 22, my mother is still unmedicated and using substances. These cycles create what I like to call grief without goodbye. Every time my mom got better, I'd hope things would finally be different. Every time she relapsed, I'd lose her all over again. Telling this story now helps me make sense of those losses and hopefully helps others feel seen in theirs too. Supporting children with parents that have bipolar disorder starts with recognizing that their grief is real, even if their parent is still alive. Research by Toole in 2025 emphasizes the need for family-centered interventions that normalize parent symptoms and validate children's experiences. Effective supports include psychoeducation, which teaches children that the illness is not their fault, group therapy, which creates a sense of belonging, and narrative therapy, which helps children reframe their stories from one of chaos to one of resilience. Our textbook, Living Through Loss, reminds us that disenfranchised and ambiguous grief requires social validation. As a social worker, I want to be that validating voice, helping kids like me find language for the losses that they were never or could not be able to name. Grief has shaped who I am, not through death but through living loss. Being the child of a bipolar parent taught me empathy before I even knew what empathy was. As I prepare to enter the field of social work, my goal is to help children who are grieving in ways the world does not recognize. Those who are mourning parents' loss to illness, addiction, or emotional absence. If we can normalize these experiences, teach coping strategies, and offer validation, we can help them break cycles of pain and find meaning in their story, just like I'm learning to find meaning in mine. Thank you for listening.